April 1945. The roads of Germany were broken veins, choked with refugees, rubble, and the endless rumble of tanks. I was 24 years old, a clerk conscripted into military service after my village was bombed. Captured near the Rhine, I became a prisoner, stripped of everything but the clothes on my back. We were herded into a column and marched under the gray sky, our boots sinking into mud as American jeeps rolled past with engines that sounded like thunder. The scale of it was what stunned me first. Their trucks stretched for miles, their tanks growled like metal beasts, their soldiers moved with a rhythm that spoke of discipline drilled into their bones. We had been told for years that America was soft, decadent, incapable of true war. But here, on the ruined roads of my homeland, I saw the lie laid bare. Their power was overwhelming, their numbers endless. I felt small, swallowed by a tide I could not resist. We passed through towns flattened by bombing, houses reduced to skeletons, church spires snapped in half. Civilians stood in doorways, their eyes blank, clutching children who no longer cried. Hunger gnawed at us all, but the Americans marched with packs full of supplies, rifles glinting, helmets shining even under clouds of smoke. I wanted to hate them, to curse them, but part of me could not stop staring. Their boots were polished, their uniforms intact, their trucks fueled and steady. Where our army had withered, theirs had only grown stronger. That first night, we were herded into a field ringed with barbed wire. I collapsed onto the grass, my body aching, my stomach clawing itself empty. The guards moved with efficiency, stringing wire, posting sentries, setting up lights that cut through the dark like a new kind of sun. Their floodlamps hummed, powered by generators that growled steadily, machines we could never have kept running. The might of America was not only in its soldiers, but in its endless supply of machines. A guard passed by, his rifle slung, and for a moment I flinched, bracing for a blow. None came. His eyes swept over us, detached, professional, then moved on. I thought of what our own soldiers had done in occupied lands, of the cruelty whispered in letters smuggled home. I had prepared myself for the same. Instead, I was ignored. It was strange, almost humiliating, to be treated as nothing more than another body to be managed. Later, they distributed food, cans of meat, bread, coffee in tin cups. I stared at the portion in my hands, unable to believe it. Our army had fed us crusts and weeds, yet the enemy placed real food before us. The taste was salty, rich, almost unbearable after months of rationing. I ate slowly, each bite both a relief and a reminder of defeat. I could not reconcile the two, that the enemy who had bombed my city was now filling my stomach. That night, I lay awake under the glare of the lamps, listening to the hum of machines, the clatter of American boots, the low laughter of men who had already won. My heart pounded with fear, shame, and something else I dared not name. I had survived the collapse of Germany, only to face the immensity of a power I had been told did not exist. In my mind, I wrote words I had no paper for. I thought we were the strongest. I thought we would never break. But tonight, under the lights of the Americans, I see how small we really are, and I wondered what other truths I had yet to face. The next morning, the camp revealed itself in full light. Rows of barbed wire glistened with dew. Watchtowers stood at each corner, and American sentries paced with rifles at their shoulders, their movements steady and unhurried. Everything was organized, efficient, relentless. Even the mud seemed pressed flat beneath their boots. We, the prisoners, shuffled in ragged clothes, hollow-eyed, while around us the enemy moved with precision, their belts polished, their weapons gleaming. Breakfast came with the same mechanical certainty. Soldiers unloaded crates from a truck, opened them with crowbars, and handed out portions: biscuits, tinned fruit, coffee. Coffee again! Its bitter aroma floated above the camp, sharp and foreign, while I clutched the cup in both hands, burning my palms but unwilling to let go. I thought of my mother boiling weeds to make a broth in the final months of the war, and here the Americans poured black liquid into tin cups, as if it were nothing, as if abundance had no end. It was not just food or coffee. It was the machines, everywhere. Engines hummed, generators, trucks, jeeps. At night, the lights stayed on, glaring white against the sky. A second sun that never slept. I watched them from the ground where I lay, staring upward, too stunned to close my eyes. I thought of our bombed-out towns where candles sputtered in dark cellars, where families prayed for scraps of coal. The Americans had so much power that they wasted light on prisoners. It was unbelievable. During the day, I studied them as they marched around the perimeter. Their uniforms were not torn. Their boots did not leak. They carried themselves with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from certainty. Certainty that they would eat. Certainty that their guns would fire. Certainty that they would go home. I envied that certainty. Our soldiers had marched with hollow eyes, their uniforms patched, their weapons rusted, their orders desperate. Seeing the Americans felt like staring at another species altogether. Men born into strength. The women in the camp whispered their fears at night. Some believed the restraint would not last, that eventually the soldiers would come for us. Others whispered about Nuremberg, about trials, about punishments worse than death. I did not know what to believe. But what struck me most was the way the guards kept their distance. They did not leer. They did not jeer. They watched us the way one might watch a field of cattle, important to manage, but not to violate. For me, that was its own kind of shock. I had prepared for violence, braced for it, and instead, I was invisible. Still, invisibility could not erase humiliation. When they counted us at roll call, when they herded us into lines, when they turned the lights on at night, I felt smaller than I had ever felt. I thought of the speeches I had once believed, the rallies, the promises of strength, of destiny. Now, destiny looked like a flood of olive green uniforms and endless supplies, and strength belonged not to us, but to them. One afternoon, I saw something I will never forget. A convoy entered the camp, trucks loaded with supplies. Soldiers jumped down, laughing, their movements practiced. But behind the trucks came something larger, a Sherman tank. Its tracks ground the earth beneath it. Its gun barrel pointed skyward like a finger raised to God. I froze. I had seen German panzers once, in parades, painted and polished to inspire awe. But this was different. This was not parade glory. This was raw, unstoppable force. Dust rose around it, and every step of its treads felt like thunder in my chest. In that moment, I understood that our defeat had never been a matter of courage or will. It had been a matter of power, and the Americans had more of it than we could ever imagine. That night, I wrote in my mind again, they win not only with bombs and tanks. They win because they can keep the lights burning while the world crumbles. They win because their stomachs are full, their machines are fed, their boots are strong. We had none of these. Sometimes I caught myself staring at the guards, trying to imagine what they saw when they looked at me. Did they see guilt? Did they see an enemy? Or just a number in their logbooks? One evening, as rations were handed out, a soldier's eyes met mine for a brief moment. He looked tired, not cruel. He looked at me the way one might look at a stranger on a train, acknowledging existence, nothing more. For reasons I could not explain, that look left me trembling. Still, I remained haunted by the contradiction. How could these men show such order and restraint while the bombs their planes dropped had turned my town into dust? How could they hand me bread with one hand and level entire cities with the other? The questions gnawed at me as fiercely as hunger had. By the second week, I began to understand something I had never considered before. America's strength was not only in weapons, but in abundance. Their soldiers fought without hunger. Their engines roared without pause. Their factories, an ocean away, kept feeding this machine until it drowned us. We had been told they were weak, but the truth stood before me in steel and light, and I wondered if I could ever return home carrying that knowledge, or if home itself no longer existed. Days turned into weeks, and still the camp hummed with the sound of engines. The Americans' machines never seemed to rest. Trucks came and went, loaded with supplies, their tires cutting deep tracks into the mud. Jeeps patrolled the perimeter with a low growl. At night, the generators purred and the floodlights blazed, swallowing the darkness that had once hidden us. It felt as though even the night belonged to them. I could not look away from their discipline. Roll call came with precision. The guards' voices clipped, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. They carried themselves with an assurance we had never known. I remembered German soldiers returning from the Eastern Front, gaunt, uniforms ragged, boots held together with string. Here, in this camp, The Americans looked like they had stepped out of photographs. Uniforms neat, belts polished, faces hardened, but not broken. It was as though their entire country had marched into Germany with them. Food remained the sharpest reminder of our defeat. Each morning we were handed portions from crates stamped U.S. Army, cans of meat, powdered milk, biscuits so hard they cracked my teeth, but still we devoured them. Once I was given a tin of peaches, golden slices swimming in syrup. I had not tasted fruit in years. I lifted one piece to my mouth slowly, almost reverently. The sweetness flooded my tongue and I nearly cried. Around me, other women savored their portions in silence, some closing their eyes as if praying. I thought of children back home, scavenging for potato skins, and here the Americans gave peaches to prisoners. It was obscene, and yet it was salvation. The whispers in the camp changed. At first we had whispered about fear of what the Americans would do to us, fear of violation, fear of punishment. But after weeks passed without incident, the whispers turned to awe. Some women said it was all a show for the Red Cross, that the kindness would vanish once no one was watching. Others believed it was genuine discipline, drilled so deep it could not be broken. I did not know what to believe. All I knew was that every day I woke to order, not chaos, and order itself was shocking after years of war. One afternoon, I watched a column of American soldiers march past the fence. Their weapons gleamed, their steps synchronized. Behind them came supply trucks, canvas covers tied down tight, crates stacked neatly, and behind those trucks, more tanks. The ground shook as they passed, their steel bodies dwarfing everything around them. I pressed my hand to the wire, staring as dust rose in their wake. Each tank was a reminder that our cities had fallen, not because we lacked courage, but because we lacked this. We had never had enough. They had too much. The sound of engines became part of my body. Even when I closed my eyes, I felt the vibrations in my bones. When the planes flew overhead, the sky filled with their roar, endless, unstoppable. I remembered our Luftwaffe, once so feared, now a memory of broken machines rusting in fields. The Americans filled the skies the way they filled the roads, completely. There were moments, though, when I glimpsed something softer. A medic crouched to tend a boy's wounded leg, his hands efficient but gentle. A guard tossed a piece of candy to a child through the fence, smiling faintly when the boy laughed. Once, a soldier offered me a cigarette. I took it with trembling hands, unsure if it was a trick. He struck a match, lit it for me, then walked away without a word. I inhaled, the smoke bitter, the gesture more unsettling than cruelty would have been. At night, I sometimes crept closer to the fence, listening to their conversations. I could not understand the words, but their voices were different from ours. They laughed more often. Their tone carried no despair. They spoke as men who knew they would return home, not as men waiting to die. It made me ache in places I had not felt in years. Still, shame pressed down on me. Each bite of bread tasted of defeat. Each sip of coffee reminded me that my family had none. I tried to hate them. I reminded myself of the bombs, the firestorms, the rubble where my home once stood. But the more I watched, the harder hatred became. They were too disciplined, too restrained, too human. One day, a new convoy arrived. Dozens of trucks, endless crates. We watched from inside the wire as soldiers unloaded them with practiced speed. Then, something larger appeared, a massive artillery piece towed by another vehicle. Its wheels dug into the earth, its barrel pointed skyward, a weapon that seemed to stretch toward the clouds. I stared at it, my stomach tight. This was the might that had crushed our armies, the machine that made resistance useless. I felt both terror and relief. Terror that such power existed. Relief that it was no longer pointed at me. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake under the glare of the floodlights, listening to the hum of the generators, the distant laughter of soldiers, the ever-present rhythm of engines. In the silence between, I whispered to myself, "It is not their bombs that shock me most. It is their abundance, their certainty, their endless strength." For the first time, I began to wonder if survival itself was enough. Spring came late in 1945. The fields beyond the barbed wire turned green again, but inside the camp, the mud never seemed to dry. We rose each morning to the bugle call and the steady clatter of boots. By then, I no longer flinched at the sound. It had become part of the rhythm of survival. louder than birdsong, more constant than prayer. The Americans' order astonished me even more than their weapons. Every task happened on time. Trucks unloaded crates at dawn, soldiers marched their routes without faltering, rations were distributed without chaos. Even their laughter followed a rhythm, drifting across the camp like a reminder that victory made men light-hearted. We Germans had lived in disorder for so long. Bombings at night, shortages in the day, rumors whispered in cellars. To see the enemy operate like a machine that never broke was both humiliating and strangely comforting. Food was the most vivid symbol of their might. I will never forget the day they handed us powdered eggs. I stirred them into water and watched them turn into something resembling the breakfasts I had once known before the war. The taste was strange, but rich with protein, foreign, and yet miraculous. Another day we received Spam, pink meat inside a tin, its smell filling the air. We gagged at first, unfamiliar with its texture, but hunger conquered pride. Soon women licked their fingers, murmuring thanks in whispers they would never admit aloud. And then there was chocolate. To this day, I cannot smell it without thinking of that camp. A soldier tossed a bar toward us, and we tore it into pieces, sharing it like treasure. The sweetness filled my mouth until my throat ached. For a moment I felt almost human again. Not a prisoner, not defeated, but simply alive. That was their true weapon, reminding me that life could still taste sweet when everything I had believed had turned to ash. The machines never stopped. Generators droned, trucks groaned, tanks rumbled. Even planes overhead came and went with such frequency that we stopped looking up. For us, machines had become symbols of hunger and fear. Factories bombed, trains stalled, weapons abandoned for lack of fuel. For them, machines were as reliable as the sun. It seemed America had harnessed an endless river of steel, fuel, and food, and that river had drowned us long before we admitted defeat. One evening, as I sat near the fence, I watched the guards rotate with exact precision, their rifles slung, their faces calm. I thought of our own soldiers, ragged and desperate, ordered to fight to the last bullet. Here, discipline was not desperation. It was confidence. I pressed my forehead to the wire and whispered into the night, "We never had a chance." The irony cut me deepest when I thought of our propaganda. For years, we had been told America was weak, that its people were soft and spoiled, that they would never endure hardship. And yet, in this camp, I saw the opposite. I saw men who could march endlessly because they had shoes that never fell apart. I saw machines that ran day and night because they never lacked fuel. I saw soldiers who carried photographs of wives and children, laughing around campfires, certain they would go home. Weakness? No. It was strength in a form we had never understood. Strength born from industry, from abundance, from the ability to sustain war without collapsing. Still, the shame never left me. At night, wrapped in a blanket stamped U.S. Army, I thought of my family in a ruined village, perhaps still huddled in a cellar, perhaps gone. I thought of the faces of neighbors burned in firestorms. I thought of how much of this war had been built on lies, on promises of destiny and supremacy. And here I was, alive only because my captors were too disciplined to mistreat me, too strong to fear me. The day of release came quietly. Papers were signed, names checked against lists, and then the gates opened. We were free. The word felt hollow. Where could I go? Home was rubble. The Reich that had promised eternity had vanished overnight. The Americans watched us walk out, their rifles at their sides, their eyes unreadable. Not one hand reached for me. Not one soldier demanded anything. That silence was the loudest parting gift they could give. I walked slowly down the road, clutching a dented tin cup and half a loaf of bread they had given me for the journey. Behind me, the hum of generators faded, replaced by the cries of crows circling ruined fields. I thought of all I had seen, tanks that shook the ground, lights that erased the night, soldiers who moved like gears in a machine too vast to stop. And I realized then that the true shock was not only their mercy, but their might. America had been painted as weak, but it was strength beyond imagination that had defeated us. Even now, decades later, I remember the roar of those machines, the taste of peaches from a tin, the steady gaze of guards who never touched me. I was a German woman POW, and I was shocked by U.S. military might, shocked not only by their power to destroy, but by their power to discipline, to feed, to restrain. If my story stirred you, if it made you reflect on war, power, and humanity, then help keep these memories alive. Subscribe to this channel, leave your comment, and share your thoughts. Your voice ensures that the lessons of the past are not lost to silence.